between shots, running off, conceiving the dance, choreographing the dance. You were up all night dancing.
For decades, Oprah Winfrey was the symbol of absolute compassion, a healing voice that always stood on the side of what is right, gentle and persuasive enough for the public to place their full trust in her voluntarily. Yet behind the lights, the name Oprah repeatedly surfaced alongside murky projects, disgraced figures, and stories that never received a complete explanation. She moved within the most powerful circles in the world, appeared at Jeffrey Epstein's parties, built a school for girls in South Africa, and then became entangled in serious allegations of abuse and human trafficking. And yet, strangely, Oprah always emerged from every suspicion with an image of total innocence. Each time controversy erupted, the public was reminded that she was merely too kind, too trusting, or simply a victim of malicious misunderstandings. Even the controversial charitable activities in Hawaii, where the boundary between goodwill and personal interest grew dangerously blurred, were cloaked in familiar language, benevolence, empathy, and good intentions. But when too many unfortunate incidents repeat themselves, one is forced to stop and ask, is this merely a string of unlucky coincidences, or the trace of a power structure concealed with extraordinary skill? And if one person is always the storyteller of morality, then who is powerful enough to question them? To understand why such doubts exist, one must return to the beginning of Oprah's career, the milestones that carried her to the summit of fame along a path almost no one else could replicate. At just 19 years old, she became the youngest person and the first Black woman to anchor a television news broadcast in Nashville, an anomaly in an industry dominated by cold, privileged white men. Oprah was not like them, and for that very reason, she was initially seen as someone who did not belong. The turning point came in 1984, when she moved to Chicago to host AM Chicago. Within weeks, the program rose to #1, defeating long-standing television giants. By 1986, The Oprah Winfrey Show was syndicated nationally and quickly became the most powerful talk show in the United States. Oprah did not merely host a show, she reshaped how television spoke to people. Oprah's power did not lie in investigative sharpness, but in connection. She listened, allowing others to open themselves, bringing ordinary lives, wounds, and hidden pain onto national television. For the first time, millions of viewers saw themselves reflected on screen without judgment, without lecturing. Critics once dismissed Oprah as too emotional, too ordinary, lacking academic intellect. But that very quality became the foundation of her greatest power trust. Oprah was not believed because of credentials or data, but because of the familiarity and recognition she made people feel. And from there, Oprah transcended the role of a television host. She became a cultural phenomenon, a voice capable of shaping the emotions, beliefs, and choices of millions. It was precisely at this peak, where compassion fused with immense media power, that the first questions began to form. When someone is trusted absolutely, is anyone still brave enough to doubt them? That trust reached its climax when Oprah turned her own body into a public experiment. She undertook the medical fasting program, OptiFast, for 4 months, consuming no solid food and only 420 calories per day. Oprah dropped from 212 pounds to 145 pounds, then appeared on air pulling a wagon filled with fat, a symbol of willpower and victory over the body. That episode drew 62 million viewers. Oprah did not merely tell a story, she lived it. And from that moment on, her fame extended beyond words. The public began to believe if Oprah believed in something, it was worth following. Oprah Winfrey transformed from a television host into a cultural phenomenon. Emotion was elevated to stand beside reason, and a woman once deemed unsuitable redefined the entire game. She had reached the pinnacle of glory, a place where a personal statement could alter the behavior of tens of millions of people. But that very moment also opened the door to the dark side of power. An extreme, tightly supervised medical program was interpreted as a simple trick for the masses. From there, Oprah crossed into the domains of health, nutrition, and lifestyle in the unofficial role of an expert. Power, once it reaches such heights, begins to drag consequences behind it that can no longer be ignored. By 1988, Oprah stood on a summit few could touch. The founding of Harpo Studios made her only the third woman in American entertainment history to own her own studio. Her power now extended far beyond the confines of a daytime talk show. She did not merely guide a program, she shaped the national conversation. And with that power, her ambition no longer had limits. Oprah was willing to push daytime television beyond boundaries that had never been crossed. One of the most controversial moments came when she invited white supremacists onto her show to discuss their worldview. Sitting across from them, Oprah directly asked whether their comparison of black people to monkeys was a proven fact. But the very act of giving them a platform was an irreversible mistake. Those carriers of hatred used Oprah's broadcast to spread their poison, and although her original intention was to expose their ignorance and violence, the result was the opposite. Oprah later admitted that she had inadvertently empowered a dangerous energy. She declared that she would never again allow her platform to be abused in that way. But that promise did not last. Oprah continued to grant space to other extreme voices, and the show gradually drifted away from everyday conversations into the realm of sensationalism. One of her most successful content arcs revolved around what became known as the Satanic Panic, a wave of moral hysteria sweeping across the United States. In a society steeped in fear, Oprah repeatedly invited individuals who claimed to have participated in satanic worship, child sacrifice, even cannibalism. These horrifying stories, unsupported by evidence yet delivered with unwavering certainty, led millions of viewers to believe that evil was hiding inside their schools, daycares, and families. In 1989, Oprah Winfrey opened her stage to Michelle Smith, co-author of Michelle Remembers, alongside Laurel Rose Wilson, a woman who publicly claimed to be a victim of satanic cults. They stepped onto national television with blood-soaked, dark, and shocking narratives at a moment when America was drowning in the collective fear known as the Satanic Panic. That appearance alone was enough to sow even more doubt and terror in the minds of millions. Laurel Rose Wilson's accusations had previously been recorded in her 1988 book Satan's Underground, which detailed alleged ritual torture by occult forces. But when journalists and investigators began to verify the claims, everything collapsed. There was no evidence, no medical records, no matching police reports. Those accused all had alibis, and Wilson herself had in fact lived in an orphanage, not been imprisoned by cults as she claimed. Michelle Smith's story also failed to withstand reality. Michelle Remembers. Once a cultural shockwave was peeled apart layer by layer. The months-long rituals, car accidents, hospitalizations she described left no trace in any records. Everything resembled a dark novel more than a record of memory. Yet on Oprah's stage, both stories were presented as unquestionable truth. What is terrifying is not that these stories were fabricated, but that Oprah, regarded as a voice of empathy and clarity, raised no doubts at all. No verification, no challenge, no necessary distance. Accounts tinted with science fiction were elevated into lived experience, and fear was transmitted at the speed of national television. And Oprah did not stop there. She went on to invite Duffy Strode, a young boy whose family had been ostracized by the entire town of Marion, North Carolina over beliefs deemed cult-like. Before hundreds in the studio and millions watching at home, the child was asked to explain his beliefs to defend his family, while he himself lacked the awareness to grasp what was happening. This was no longer dialogue, it was the exposure of a child to collective judgment. The boy appeared almost hypnotized, lost on a stage far too large for his fragile inner world. And it must be remembered that this was a time before social media. Duffy did not seek the spotlight. Oprah brought him there. She placed herself in the role of a rational moderator, yet refused to do the one thing that mattered most: keep the crowd calm, keep the space safe. Oprah understood one thing clearly: chaos makes compelling television. Criticism emerged, but it did not matter. She was the one in control. She owned the stage. And as long as the show continued to draw viewers, the networks would keep giving the green light. Morality in that moment became something negotiable. The interview with Michael Jackson stands as the most painful proof. It was his first television appearance in 14 years, a fragile, vulnerable moment. But Oprah did not let up. She led him back into his haunted childhood, forcing him to relive the mockery and violence inflicted by his father, slowly peeling away wounds he had barely managed to shield. The repeated questions landed like blunt knives. Was he afraid of his father? Had he ever been beaten? Why did his father beat him? Michael answered in a weak, polite voice, struggling to preserve his dignity as memories surged close to collapse. But Oprah pressed on because she knew this was unmissable television. Then the conversation slid into violation. Oprah revisited every rumor: skin color, cosmetic surgery, gender, romantic life. And finally, she asked a question that should never have been asked. Was he still a virgin? When Michael refused, visibly confused and ashamed, Oprah did not stop. She believed she had the right to know. Michael Jackson remained courteous, still clinging to the last boundary of his dignity. But that moment exposed a truth difficult to accept when media power becomes too great. Empathy can turn into intrusion, and sometimes even those seen as the kindest can inflict deep harm simply because they believe another person's story belongs to them. Oprah Winfrey had no clear boundaries, and that very absence created her absolute power on stage. Asking unannounced questions turned every interview into Oprah's personal territory, where she controlled breath emotion, even silence itself. Celebrities who stepped onto that stage understood one thing: resistance was career suicide, because Oprah's audience could love you, but could just as quickly turn away. Thus, every appearance on The Oprah Winfrey Show was a gamble. On one hand, it was the most powerful publicity machine on the planet. On the other, it was a velvet-lined trap where a single question could force you to expose secrets you were never ready to speak. Not everyone was lucid enough to escape it. Behind her gentle exterior, Oprah possessed an even more frightening power: absolute control over the story behind the scenes. If an interview failed to unfold as she wished, it could be cut, reshaped, even distorted. Rapper Ludacris once publicly stated that his conversation with Oprah had been manipulated before airing, turning him into a silent, compliant figure who appeared to accept every judgment. And it did not stop there. In 2003, Oprah herself appeared as a guest on Second Opinion with Dr. Oz. Their closeness formed almost instantly, not long after Oz became a familiar health expert on the most-watched talk show in the world. He had earned his medical degree from the University of Pennsylvania, completed a general surgery residency, and became a cardiothoracic surgeon. For many years, Oz appeared more than 60 times on Oprah's show, speaking about heart disease, cholesterol, blood pressure, and disease prevention. He offered dietary advice, weight control strategies, and explained science in a way so simple anyone could understand. To audiences, he was the ideal doctor: intelligent, approachable, and not frightening. Oprah elevated that image by introducing Oz as someone who could save lives through knowledge and compassion. Audience members stepped onto the stage in tears, saying his advice had changed their lives. Emotions swelled, trust was reinforced. In that moment, Oz was no longer just a doctor, he was a living miracle. So when he launched his own show in 2009, co-produced by Oprah's company, it felt almost inevitable. At first, Oz was praised for pushing back against supplement scams, encouraging practical and affordable solutions. He openly stated that many products on the market were unsafe. That image set him apart and made him trustworthy. But then the money began to flow, and with it everything shifted. The show gradually transformed into a disguised advertising platform. Scientific solutions were replaced by seductive promises. The peak came with green coffee bean extract promoted as a miracle in a bottle. Weight loss for every body type. No effort, no lifestyle changes. One pill and hope sold alongside it. The truth that emerged afterward was brutally cold. The study underpinning those claims was retracted due to falsified data. Years later, a U.S. senator publicly confronted Oz. Why call a purchasable product miraculous when it only sells false hope? Oz replied that he wanted to encourage viewers, wanted them to believe there was still a chance. But the question lingered unanswered. If something is sold as a miracle, is that miracle real? Or merely another story told too well on television? People often say that simply cutting carbohydrates will make weight fall off quickly, almost magically. And in truth, that is not entirely false. The body does respond rapidly when deprived of simple carbs. But the problem lies not in the biological fact, but in how it is inflated into a miracle, a language that makes hope easier to sell than reason. While Dr. Oz tirelessly promoted weight loss pills and products labeled anti-cancer, Oprah expanded her own frontier, the world of alternative healing. Their emotion was elevated above evidence, and belief valued more than scientific verification. The culmination of that journey came when she introduced a man who called himself John of God. Unlike Oz, who at least wore the white coat of medicine, John of God claimed to be a psychic, a channel between this world and the spirit realm. He said he could heal both body and soul simultaneously. For decades, the sick from around the world lined up outside Casa de Loyola in Brazil, carrying pain, desperation, and their last fragile hope. When their turn came, they received only a fleeting glance. No questions, no diagnosis. Just a declaration that the spirit of a deceased doctor was working through him that day. And when the pain did not vanish when illness remained, people blamed themselves. Perhaps they had not believed enough. Few dared to name the obvious, that this was not a miracle, but naked exploitation. John of God's real name was João Faria. To any clear-minded observer, he was nothing more than a con man, or worse, the nucleus of a cult. Yet in November 2010, Suzanne Casey wrote an article for Oprah's O magazine describing a pilgrimage to Brazil after her father's death. The piece was titled Leap of Faith, a title both fragile and dangerous. And it did not stop there. Oprah herself traveled to meet the man on Oprah's next chapter. The image of her sitting there listening, believing, became an unspoken endorsement. And for millions of viewers who had long trusted Oprah as a moral compass, that was enough. John of God's Center suddenly became an international destination. Thousands of people poured into Brazil carrying the faith Oprah had bestowed upon them. But behind the doors of healing lay a horrific truth. More than 200 complaints were filed across 9 Brazilian states, along with reports from abroad. The number later swelled to nearly 600 victims women abused continuously from 1986 to 2017. In the end, John of God was forced to turn himself in to the authorities. Perhaps Oprah truly did not know. Perhaps she only read the article, trusted her team's verification process, and believed she was doing the right thing. But in hindsight, a disturbing pattern emerges again and again. Oprah handed the microphone, the spotlight, and legitimacy to dangerous individuals. And at that point, she was too powerful, too revered, to the extent that almost no one believed Oprah could be wrong. By 2010, Oprah Winfrey stood in a position few people in history had ever reached: absolute power in popular culture. She consistently topped lists of the world's most influential celebrities, to the point that earning only $77 million in a year was considered a disappointment. Yet from that very peak, a quiet misalignment began to form between Oprah and the lived realities of the people she always believed she represented. Money came too easily, and goodwill gradually became mistaken for a solution. Oprah believed that if she gave on a grand enough scale, everything would simply work itself out. Lavish giveaway shows and decisions branded as philanthropy were loudly celebrated, but behind the lights, the outcomes were not always as humane as originally intended. At this moment, Oprah embarked on an ambitious project. After a conversation with Nelson Mandela, she became convinced that education was the only path to breaking injustice. That belief drove her to build a school exclusively for poor girls in South Africa as a symbol of hope and future leadership. The Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls was launched with a $40 million investment, 28 modern buildings, dormitories, a theater, books, uniforms, meals, everything provided free of charge. In Oprah's mind, it was the perfect gift, created from the very best she could offer. But she did not foresee that this place built from dreams and trust would later become the clearest mirror of the limits of power, money, and goodwill when unaccompanied by deep understanding of human reality. Everything at Oprah's school was free, and that fact alone placed her at the center of controversy from the outset. People did not see just a school, but an influx of luxury into the lives of girls from the poorest communities. Oprah pledged to clean up the school to protect the girls at all costs. Numerous staff members were dismissed and new rules were imposed with unprecedented strictness. But that fierce response inadvertently pushed things further than intended, turning protection into a form of heavy control. Parents began to speak out. Some said the school felt like a place that isolated students from the world. Others even compared it to a legal form of abduction. Visiting hours were severely restricted, family meetings became rare and tense. To them, this was no longer a dream school, but a suffocatingly closed environment. Complaints multiplied, children were not allowed. Snacks, diets were tightly controlled, daily life strictly regulated. "This is not a prison," one parent said, "but it feels like one." Notably, in official meetings, these concerns were often brushed aside as if they were not important enough to be heard. Once again, Oprah seemed to believe that her generosity and goodwill were sufficient. She had long called herself a mother to children around the world, famously stating she would never regret not having biological children. But symbolic motherhood is not the same as carrying daily responsibility for a child's safety and psychological wounds. That distance Oprah did not see or chose not to see. Later, she admitted she had underestimated the psychological impact of an overly strict boarding environment, yet that admission still carried the tone of justification. She had been overprotective because she loved too much. And then came the final blow to the fragile trust that remained. Virginia Makapo was acquitted, all charges dismissed due to insufficient evidence. There was no justice for the girls who had spoken out. Oprah expressed disappointment, voiced pride in their courage. But the painful truth remained: at a school built on dreams and power, those wounds were never fully healed. Most recently, Oprah's name has surfaced in a wave of heavy speculation surrounding the Jeffrey Epstein case. Indirect connections have kept public suspicion alive. Geraldine Laybourne. Oprah's former business partner and co-founder of Oxygen Media appeared in Epstein's private flight logs. From there, an unsettling feeling took shape. Oprah always seemed to be standing very close to the scene of major scandals, even though she was never directly accused. The list of names that have crossed her life sends a chill down the spine. Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby, Diddy. A school in South Africa where sexual abuse occurred. Again and again, Oprah emerged intact, unscathed, with the same familiar explanation. Misunderstandings, misplaced compassion, a desire to do the right thing. Perhaps the simpler explanation lies in power. When you are one of the most influential people on the planet, your world no longer resembles that of ordinary people. Your social circle is built from billionaires, kingmakers, and those who control the game. Standing next to Weinstein or Cosby is not always about shared values, but about the reality of Hollywood and elite society. Oprah understands this, and she also knows she must speak when public outrage erupts. Regarding Diddy, she hurried to deny any deep involvement, never attended the parties, never stayed long, always the first to leave. But when it came to Harvey Weinstein, her tone suddenly became evasive, cautious to a suspicious degree. Weinstein was not merely a bad man, he was a symbol of rot, concealed by power. More than 80 women accused him, 6 testified in court, and his 23-year prison sentence in 2020 was only the visible tip of decades of abuse. Hush money, private investigators, invisible threats. All of it existed in a world Oprah had been very close to. When asked directly about Weinstein, Oprah did not confront the issue head-on. She redirected the conversation toward a systemic problem, speaking about women's silence and fear of losing one's job. Those words were not wrong, but in that moment they sounded more like a shield than truth, a way to avoid naming the man she had once embraced on camera. Instead of being seen as a generous symbol with open arms, Oprah in that moment appeared to many as a vast landowner scrambling to protect the empire she had quietly accumulated over the years. The image of a woman of compassion was suddenly clouded by doubt. Was this giving, or merely a sophisticated act of self-defense? Not long after, Oprah's ties to Hawaii began once again. Bob Greene, her longtime trainer and real estate manager, was the first to plant the idea. He had loved this land for 15 years, loved the gentle climate, the brooding mountain ranges, and the ocean stretching open before the eyes. And it was he who pointed Oprah toward a remote area, where houses clung silently to moss-covered hillsides, overlooking the sea, like mute sentinels. Oprah quickly wrapped her land purchases in the familiar language of morality. She said Bob feared that real estate corporations would flood in erect condominiums and swallow the untouched beauty whole. Over time, those acquisitions did not stop. Oprah continued to amass large and small parcels across Maui until the total exceeded 1,000 acres. Most of that land was kept secluded, fenced private. She was praised for employing native Hawaiians for preserving nature, yet alongside the praise, criticism thickened preservation for whom and for whose benefit. Then disaster struck. On August 8, 2023, fire swept across Maui like uncontrollable fury. Hurricane-force winds, parched vegetation, collapsed power lines all converged into a nightmare. Lahaina was nearly erased. More than 2,200 structures were reduced to ash. Hundreds of lives were lost, making it the deadliest wildfire in the United States in over a century. After the catastrophe, Oprah and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson announced the Maui People's Fund, each pledging $5 million. They urged the public to donate, stressing that cash was the most urgent need and that every dollar would go directly to those who had lost their homes. The appeal rang out with urgency, but it struck a raw nerve. To many, the image of 2 billionaires with immense fortunes asking struggling workers for money felt like a slap in the face. $5 million was pocket change to them, while the burden of giving was shifted onto the public. The outrage did not erupt because they gave, but because they gave so little compared to what they possessed. The Rock moved quickly to calm the backlash. He acknowledged that the negative reaction was understandable, took responsibility, and promised to do better. As someone born in Hawaii, he was quickly forgiven. The anger did not cling to him for long, but Oprah was not spared. She told CBS that she was being attacked, smeared, terrorized online. She spoke of her initial excitement, then waking up amid a downpour of public bitterness and asking herself, what happened? Perhaps what happened was distance, the distance between a billionaire and people who had just lost everything, where compassion was no longer enough to obscure the power and massive accumulation behind it. Once again, the familiar story was repeated. Oprah was only trying to do the right thing. She was enthusiastic, sincere, full of goodwill, and utterly unable to understand why the world was angry with her. In that narrative, Oprah is always the misunderstood one, the bearer of kindness met with suspicion and cruelty. That very outrage became fertile ground for conspiracy theories to take root. Whispers spread that she had failed to help innocent people amid the chaos in Maui. Then a larger story took hold. A secret road was allegedly closed as the fire spread, even though on paper it belonged to another estate. True or false no longer mattered because once trust fractures, every detail becomes suspect. And after every disaster, a familiar script emerges. Homes burned to the ground, residents crushed by debt insurance claims, dragging on endlessly rebuilding, turning into a distant dream. Land prices collapse. That is the moment when wealthy outsiders quietly step in, buying everything for a fraction of its worth. For those who have lost everything, rebirth begins to look like a privilege reserved for the rich. What fuels suspicion around Oprah is not a single accusation, but a recurring pattern. She is always very close to the eye of the storm, yet never the one held accountable. For decades, Oprah did not merely do media, she controlled it. She owned the platform, owned the voice, owned the narrative. And when you stepped onto her stage, she owned your voice as well. Even when much was done quietly, she still benefited. Benefited from giving stages to frauds, from turning pain into ratings, from unverified diet trends, from best-selling books and ever-expanding cultural power. She was close to predators in Hollywood, never forced to answer what she knew, and still praised for empathy when she shifted the spotlight toward victims. Today, Oprah possesses a fortune approaching $3 billion. And like so many people at the pinnacle of power, we do not need clear proof that they are evil. It is enough to understand that at some point we can no longer trust anything they say. Oprah Winfrey is a living lesson in the power of image and the ability to control the narrative. For decades, she occupied the role of moral guide, listener to pain giver, of the feeling of being understood. But from that very position, Oprah rarely paid a price when things went off course. Controversies were always softened with gentler names, misunderstandings, misplaced goodwill, good intentions with unintended outcomes. She always appeared close to the scenes of tragedies, scandals, disgraced figures, yet was almost never seen as part of the problem. The lesson here is not only about Oprah, but about how power operates in the modern world. When a person is trusted enough, they do not need to lie. They only need to tell the story in a way that benefits them. Empathy, if repeated skillfully and long enough, can become a kind of armor. It makes the public hesitate to question, turns suspicion into something cruel, and dissolves responsibility into beautiful explanations. Oprah did not become untouchable because she was perfect, but because she was always the first to define what was right and what was wrong. So the final question is this: are we admiring genuine kindness or merely an image told too well? And when someone always stands on the side of what is right, is there still anyone brave enough to ask what they had to trade away in order to stand there? Thank you for following to the end. If you are interested in the stories behind the spotlight, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and follow the upcoming videos.